Joining me now to unpack all of this is Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland, a former member of the January 6th Select Committee and a constitutional law expert, luckily for us. Congressman Raskin, thank you for being here. I just want to allow our audience to know a little bit more about John Sauer. He is a lawyer. He's based in St. Louis. He once served as the Solicitor General for that state. He joined Trump's legal team recently, and as Missouri's Solicitor General, he took part in a last-ditch effort to keep Trump in power by adding himself onto a Texas fight to try to get the Supreme Court to toss out the votes in several swing states. So just so that we understand him, I want to play for you one of the arguments here, because Judge Henderson, one of the three judges, asked whether or not the oath the president takes to ensure the laws are faithfully executed applies to this president.
I think it's paradoxical to say that his constitutional duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed allows him to violate criminal laws. Now, we're at the motion to dismiss stage. The government has charged the specific criminal laws. We have to assume they're true.
My response to that, I think, would be to emphasize what Chief Justice Marshall said in Marbury, which is that they can never be examined by courts. That naturally includes a criminal proceeding.
This gentleman also clerked for Antonin Scalia, the late Antonin Scalia. Your thoughts on whether or not the president must faithfully execute the laws, or whether he can commit crimes despite taking that oath?
Well, the whole reason why the president has an oath written for him in the Constitution itself is to bind the president to uphold and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The reason why Congress has the power to impeach the president, but the president doesn't have the power to impeach the Congress, is precisely because of the suspicion of would-be monarchs and dictators among the founders. And we were given the right to impeach a president, remove a president, to try to preserve the republic. But it's been understood for decades and decades and decades that the president, of course, has to face criminal culpability if he engages in murder or rape or violence or assassination or attempting to overthrow the union. And in fact, as you pointed out, we got Trump's lawyers to admit that at several points. That became part of their argument. If there's a real problem with Trump, they said during the Senate impeachment trial, he can, of course, be criminally prosecuted afterwards. And that was also the hook that Senator McConnell hung his hat on, saying, well, we know that Donald Trump was actually morally, ethically responsible for everything that happened that day. But he said this is not over because he can be criminally prosecuted later. So now, like a three-card Monty, they want to turn around and say, well, if you're not impeached and convicted first, you can't be convicted later. And I think the entire country, and certainly the entire judiciary, even Clarence Thomas, can see through that one. And if I could just add one other thing, almost as a point of personal privilege, if I could, Joy, when I heard Donald Trump make this argument, all I could think was, they're saying they have a right to engage in political assassination of their rivals. And if you can kill one person, certainly you can kill several of them. Well, let's say then they feel like they might be convicted in the Senate, but if they could just knock off 3 people who were going to vote to convict him, then he'd be all right. Then they go ahead and murder them. Then he can't be convicted. Then he can't be prosecuted. So I honestly believe that this Supreme Court is not so corrupted that it will fall for an argument as corrupt and pernicious as this one.
Right, and the thing about listening to this is there was one moment where it seemed that Mr. Sauer agreed that in this strange instance where the president, and no president, by the way, who's been impeached has ever been convicted. Let's just be clear. Even Andrew Johnson, who's, they had him dead to rights. He still survived by 1 vote. So as long as you have enough senators to acquit you, apparently, according to Mr. Sauer, you are above the law. But at one point, they kind of seem to take that back. This is Sauer arguing that he kind of argued that, yes, you can be convicted. If you're convicted in the Senate, you can be prosecuted. Let's just play that first. Let's start with that. This is cut 2.
Your position is, if President Trump had been convicted after his impeachment trial on incitement of insurrection, if he'd been convicted, then this prosecution would be entirely proper.
Which I would say that if you were impeached and convicted for the same and similar conduct, then that would authorize a subsequent prosecution. Obviously, we have many other issues with this prosecution.
Is that a yes?
So I do.
Because I think you said in your brief that impeachment for incitement of insurrection is based on the same or related conduct as that which is in the indictment.
Yes, yeah, I agree with that.
So if he had been convicted by the Senate, then this prosecution would be entirely proper, correct?
Well, I would not phrase it that way because there's lots of other problems with this prosecution that we've raised.
He then didn't seem to stick by that. Then later, Judge Pan says, you're conceding that presidents can criminally be prosecuted under certain circumstances, right? He said, specifically if they're impeached and convicted. I think that's the main language of the impeachment judgments clause, Judge Pan. And isn't that also a concession that a president can be criminally prosecuted for an official act because presidents can be impeached for official acts? And then he kind of went inaudible, blah, 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 blah. And then later at the very end, they got into a back and forth where he seemed to take all of that back and be like, you know, this case is too flawed. I really didn't mean it. So he didn't even stick by the idea that he presented that if convicted, they could be prosecuted.
Well, he's obviously a horrible lawyer, but it's a horrible argument. The argument they're trying to make is that is a misreading of the Constitution. The Constitution says that a president can be impeached by the House of Representatives, convicted by 2/3 in the Senate, and then removed from office, but still can be prosecuted and tried and convicted and punished in criminal court. So it's very clear the framers wanted to insist on the absolute criminal liability of presidents in all cases. They flip it over and say it stands for the obverse proposition that if you are impeached, as Donald Trump was, and not quite convicted, he beat the constitutional spread 57 to 43, we were 10 votes short. Then at that point, you can't be criminally prosecuted again. Nobody has ever tried to make such an outlandish argument before. And as we're saying, it would lead to the most perverse consequences, like the president simply assassinates his rivals and then kills the requisite number of House members and senators that he needs to kill in order to prevent himself from being impeached and convicted. And then presto, he's got complete immunity and impunity, and he's a dictator. He's Vladimir Putin or he's President Xi, and of course, that's what Donald Trump wants.
And I mean, the thing about this is it's shocking to me that a man walked into a district court and made these arguments. But to your point, if Donald Trump were to win this on this matter, that would mean, as you just said, that if he came back into office, he would have a license to kill. He would have a license to use the military to kill whoever he wanted, and at least according to his lawyer, to steal state secrets and to sell pardons. That is not a president. That is a dictator.
That's absolutely right. And I think that the argument in this case, Joy, is so outrageous, so extreme, and so autocratic that it might even shock the most obsequious sycophants to Donald Trump on the Supreme Court to look seriously at Section 3 of the 14th Amendment and the Colorado case. Because do they want to have blood on their hands if they're the ones responsible for putting Donald Trump on the ballot against the clear text of the Constitution, and then, God forbid, for some reason, he's able to get back into office, and then, well, God help us all, because who knows what would happen at that point. I think that this actually activates the court to take a very serious look. And I'm not just talking about the liberals and moderates, but even the most extreme conservatives on the court, to take a serious look at Section 3 of the 14th Amendment and why it's in the Constitution.